November is just around the corner, and that means the 16th Annual National Podcast Post Month is fast approaching. Hi, I'm Jennifer Navarrete, founder of NaPodPomo, and I'm inviting you to join the 30-day Global Podcasting Challenge. Whether you're a newbie looking to start your first podcast or a seasoned pro seeking inspiration, NaPodPomo is the perfect place to experiment and try new things. Visit napodpomo.org to learn more. See where podcasting can take you this November during National Podcast Post Month.
One good thing about how much stuff there is online now is there's a lot of places where you can go just to get prompts. And a prompt I used to use a lot just got such amazing stuff out of college kids, was write the history of your hair. And it was amazing what people would come up with. And there would be things like, oh, I remember one girl who cut off her very long hair and gave it to some place that collected hair for cancer to make wigs for cancer victims. Another person who had terrible problems with her dad because he was a commander in the army and she kept cutting her hair really short and dyeing it blue. And it brought up other memories. I recommend that for anybody here who wants to, just start with a prompt. Start writing the history of your hair and see where it takes you, because you don't have to stick with your hair if it takes you into your relationship with your parents who wanted you to cut it or grow it or groom it or whatever. You can go off in that direction, or it can take you, so many different places. It's funny, but I got some of the best personal essays out of that.
Okay, everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have a journalist, author on the podcast. We're going to be talking about a lot of great things today. Garnett Cohen is with me today, and I'm excited because there could actually be the potential that I might be asked a question, which will be interesting. Interviewing a journalist is always interesting. So, Garnett, welcome to the podcast. So glad to have you here. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. And you mentioned me as a journalist, and I have been one, but I think my friends who are journalists might question that since I've been focusing on fiction for so many years now. But I did have some training, and I started out my writing career working as a newspaper in a small town newspaper in Ohio. So I like asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And that changed wanting to be a journalist. I really wanted to be a journalist in the style of, big international stories. And instead I was covering the ice cream social and the fire trucks testing day and all of that. And I wrote a lot of obituaries, which was interesting. But as I did more, got deeper into journalism, I really decided I wanted to do fiction more because I was feeling the constraints of nonfiction, the constraints of getting people's quotations right and of covering everything correctly. Not that it mattered that much in a small town. Well, it did matter in a way because people could get really mad about stuff and they could walk right in your office. It's not like the New York Times where they write a letter, they could come right in the door. But I really wanted the freedom to take a character someplace else or do something else with the story. If I was covering whether the fire truck hoses were working, it would be good to have a fire take place during that time, or good to have the hoses not working, or something more dramatic than what I was writing about. So that's how I sort of moved gradually into fiction writing from being a journalist. In between, I was a copywriter for an advertising agency. And our biggest client was Tombstone Pizza. I'm sure you've all tried it, maybe not. Uh, but I ate a lot back then. That was a long time ago. I ate a lot of Tombstone Pizza. But gradually moved into fiction writing, primarily short stories.
Nice. And you have one up on me. You mentioned when we chatted earlier that you've actually ridden on an elephant, which I have not done. So that's interesting.
I did ride on an elephant, and it was very exciting, and it was bareback. It a circus came to the small town where I was, it came to the town next to where I was, and the parade went from the town where I lived in Ohio to the place where the circus took place. And a few reporters were allowed to ride the elephant. So I was very excited about that. And I also thought that as a writer, you were supposed to accumulate adventures. So I thought riding an elephant was an adventure, and it was. I was sore for several days afterwards. But interestingly, come full total circle, and I had the trip of a lifetime this year and went to Africa and saw elephants in the wild.
Nice.
And I have to say, I felt kind of bad about riding one. I'm glad I did, but at the same time, seeing them in the wild made me feel so sorry for elephants in circuses. And I guess they're not in circuses anymore. I don't think they are, but I'm glad I had the adventure, and it was very cool. It was
nice.
Cool.
Nice. See, there you go. I've never had that opportunity, and I do. I love seeing them in the wild, and they're just so beautiful and majestic creatures. So that's a great part of being in journalism when you were young, is that gave you the opportunity to be adventurous, and that kind of leads you to today, where you can be more adventurous with your writing as well, and go places that you might not normally logically plan to go. You can go and do all kinds of adventure in your writing now. So talk a little bit now about what your author journey looks like now.
Well, I'm excited because, talking about living the new chapter, on top of having this new book coming out, I also just retired. So, and I was worried about retiring. I was thinking, this is the end, retirement is the end. And interestingly, I found a lot of new inspiration and feel a freshness about writing that I didn't feel before, or I lost a little bit of, would be a more appropriate way of saying it. And I'm writing slightly more speculative stories, and where something like I do in one of the stories in my book, I do get into an animal's head, the point of view. A little boy, and I took this from a news story, a little boy fell in a gorilla pit in the zoo. And I go into the gorilla's point of view as he's looking at the boy, and he's feeling sort of maternal toward the boy. And I would say for many years, maybe because of the journalistic background, I wanted, my stories to be really real. And I'm moving away from that a little bit.
That's a whole new muscle then to exercise.
It is.
Getting away from the reality and into creating a new world. That's a different writing altogether.
It is. By the way, I meant to ask you, do you write lyrics to songs?
I do. I have a few that I've written. Most of my stuff is going to be musical that I do, the music to the words. I work with a lot of lyricists, and so they're looking for music to go to the words they've already written. So that's where I do most of my music, is with that. But I have written some of my stuff, and I like to create visuals with my lyrics so that people can enter into the story. But what I find interesting is even when I write through my lens towards my audience and what I'm trying to communicate, someone will hear a song and take it in a totally different direction I didn't intend, and say that the song means this to them when I was trying to do a different take on the lyrics of my song. It means one thing to me and means something completely different to my audience. And I love that that's what people can do with what we write, is they can take it places we didn't intend. I find that very curious and exciting as well.
No, I think that's wonderful. And I taught for a long time. That's what I retired from. And that was the exciting thing about teaching, was so often students had completely different takes on things we were reading, or stories that I had for so long, particularly published famous writer stories. I had so long in my head sort of the interpretation. And it's just like you feel your mind open when someone says something else, and it's just as true as your interpretation, but it's completely different. That's not to say that sometimes I didn't think they were completely true as my interpretation, but when they are, it just is an amazing feeling.
Yeah, I love that we get to bring ourselves to the creative process to write something, whether it's music or a book or whatever. And then the audience also brings themselves to the creative project, and they have a lens of their own, that they filter what we write and who we are and what we're trying to say. They filter through their experience. And you can also go read a book that you read years ago, read it now, and you'll see things different because you're a different person than you were the first time you read the book.
You know, that's so funny you would say that. I think of Shakespeare. When I read Hamlet when I was in high school, I was totally on Hamlet's side. When I saw the play just a few years ago, I thought, what a spoiled teenager. In a couple of the places in it. But I think that's part of the genius of Shakespeare, but I also feel that, more with King Lear, since I'm getting older, I can feel the idea of what it feels like to feel like you're, like you're getting older. That's, and that people aren't looking at you the same way sometimes.
Right.
So,
Right. So talk more about your most recent work that you're working on, and it's coming out. Tell us more about the story, maybe a little bit behind the scenes of writing this.
Okay, this book, I would say one of the stories in it, I think it's this, yes, it is the second story in the book. It's called Slow Dance. It is the most recent book. It was published in December of it's the most recent story in the book. It was published in December of last year, but I have stories that are almost 10 years old in the book. And the idea was, in a story collection, is you want the stories to somehow be connected to each other, have a similar theme or idea, but you don't want them to be so closely, that you don't want them to be so much like that it's like you're reading the same story regurgitated over and over again. So I published another book about 8 years ago, and some of the stories in this new book, Cravings, I wrote before the last book, but they fit better in this book. I had a long time coming up with the title, Cravings. It was sort of interesting. The director of the press didn't like the title I did have. And boy, we went on for months about the title. And it turned out, with his help, I was glad of his help, everyone in every story in the book wants something. And sometimes it's really sort of obsessive, like a craving, like we think of the word craving. And sometimes it's just wanting friendship or wanting to be liked or something like that. And I realized that was what made me, for a while, I was like, let's just slap a title on it. But I realized that long process made me realize that's one of the things that makes me care about characters and care about people, is what do they want? What do they want out of life? What do they want out of a particular situation? And sometimes it can be, greedy what they want. But sometimes it can be something so simple as to have a new friend or to make something. But so that's how the title came about. Um, and as I mentioned to you before, not to everyone else here, but I mentioned to you before that that I went from journalism to writing fiction because I didn't like the constraints. Well, I mentioned that today. But I also have gone back to writing nonfiction a lot because I'm not feeling the constraints as much, and because I'm writing mostly personal essays, and because now I have so much, I have a lot to look back on. But at the same time that I have a lot to look back on, I realize everything doesn't have to, in a personal essay, be journalistically connected to the truth. There can be a lot of wondering in a personal essay or conjecture. You don't need to, call up people and find out exactly what they said at this time or what you said. And that brings me back to something else you said. It has to do with interpretation, because we all remember events differently as well. And unless we're recording them, as we are now, we remember. I don't know if you have siblings. Do you have siblings?
I do have a sister, yes.
Yes. Well, I have a sister too, and we remember things very differently often.
I remember everything correctly. She does not.
Well, that's often how it works.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
And you were probably also the good one in the incident.
Of course, you know me so well. Yes.
Yes. So that's interesting to me too. I've really been interested in the way that memory works. And so that's what I play with a lot in my nonfiction. The last maybe 10 years of my mom's life, she had Alzheimer's, and she lived in a facility near me, but I was her primary caretaker. And it made me think. I've written a lot of essays about memory now, but it made me think about how you remember things and what stays with you and what doesn't stay with you, and exploring that idea.
The one thing I'm thinking too as we chat is how things are different now for creators. When early days for you writing for the paper, writing elephants and doing all that in journalism, you had to have permission. You had to have, you couldn't just write something and put it out in the world. You had to follow steps, and you had to be part of a bigger newspaper or something to get your voice into the world. Now, anyone can create something and put it out to the world with really a low barrier of entry. You can communicate with the world as a writer, and you don't need permission from people to put something on social media, for example, or create a website, or you can do whatever you want. So what are you seeing now as you look back through your career of writing? How different are things from when you first started to where you are now? What are you seeing for authors?
So different. I mean, one of the things, there's pros and cons, of course, and things that I really like about it and things I don't like about it. I don't like how hard it is sometimes to sort through the junk that's out there, because it hasn't already been curated for us. But then you also can stumble on some brilliant things that would have not been published or not been out there if not for this. I have mixed feelings about Facebook, which I'm on. And one of the things is I like that there's an ongoing conversation. I like it when it's happening that way, and it's not just people posting, here's my vacation, although that's fine too. But I like when it's sort of an ongoing conversation. One of the things that is so scary about Facebook is now that I'm in touch with friends from grade school and high school, I have to think a lot more before I write a story that involves one of them. I think of John Updike or someone writing stories from his childhood where these people have just gone into the ether, for 40 years after he was in grade school. Who knows where the people he knew then, and who knows who would recognize themselves or think they recognize themselves. But it's sort of interesting how you're always connected with your past if you're on Facebook and if you've friended people from your past. But I think sorting through the junk is the worst problem. And but there's access to so much more stuff as well. So that's
Right.
good. That's good.
Yeah. When I look at it too, yeah, I like kind of talk about it this way. There's the beautiful thing about today now is anyone can write, and the worst thing about today is anyone can write. It's the two things.
That's
right?
a really good way of
Yeah.
putting it. Yeah, some things are meant to be kept in people's personal journals at home. It's good
Right.
that everyone can write, but we don't have to have every single thing out there. But there are so many good books out there now, but also the publishing world in some ways has gotten so small. 5 really major big publishing houses. If you don't know the other places to look, university presses, literary presses, if you, or just, I love to just walk around a bookstore and read first sentences of books and see if they draw me in.
Nice.
And I read so many books that way that I'm surprised when sometimes a friend has suggested a book and I say, "Oh, I haven't heard of that," and she'll say, "Oh, it was a New York Times bestseller," and I think, well, there I am roaming in a bookstore, looking at the first lines of, or going on university press sites. So, and there's a lot of good books on the New York Times
Yeah.
bestseller list. Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so I want you to put your teacher hat back on for a moment.
Okay.
I'm going to sit up straight in my desk
Okay.
and pay attention. I'm not going to bug my neighbors sitting next to the left or right of me. I'm going to focus my attention on you as the teacher. Can you give us a little bit of instruction for authors and readers that are listening about the writing process from your point of view? Maybe some ideas that we can implement as we're writing, because there's new authors listening to our podcast who are very early days getting their voice into the world. They're looking for some insight, some inspiration from someone that has done it and has done it well. Can you put that teacher hat on and give us a little time of instruction for authors as we kind of chase our craft?
Okay. One of the things I would say that's important, particularly for beginning authors, is not to think you need to have, if you're writing a short story, or even an essay, I'm going to stick with those two short forms, essays or short stories, not to think you have to have the complete piece in your mind beforehand. I mean, there's some things where you need an outline, but very, very rarely in a short story or an essay. You start with the germ of an idea, and then it evolves organically. And that gives it a much better sense of being authentic. Plus, if you want the whole story or the whole essay to be in your head, so you're going to procrastinate a lot because it's going to take a long time for that whole story or whole essay to get into your head. And the best thing is when, it almost seems a cliche to say, but when you discover something in something you're writing, like you're writing about, I mentioned writing about my mother and Alzheimer's. When I'm writing about that, and all of a sudden I remember something she said or did when I was a little girl that was totally out of my consciousness, that was not in my stockpile of memories that I trot out. Or when you're writing fiction, if your character makes a move that you weren't expecting. So the main thing, start with something. I'm not a big proponent of free writing where you just sit down and write, but start with something. It can be something very small. It can be an image It can be something you overheard someone say. It can be a memory that's been kind of obsessive that you keep going back over and over again in your head and think, why am I going over that? And start writing about that. And you don't even have to know, usually in the beginning, whether it's going to be fiction or a personal essay. It can go in any direction. Then, of course, when you get done, you got to go back and revise it so it fits the category more. And so if it's a personal essay, there's more adherence to truth in however you define that than in fiction. But I would say not to worry, not feel you have to know the ending, but start with something. One good thing about how much stuff there is online now is there's a lot of places where you can go just to get prompts. And a prompt I used to use a lot just got such amazing stuff out of college kids, was write the history of your hair. And it was amazing what people would come up with. And there would be things like, oh, I remember one girl who cut off her very long hair and gave it to some place that collected hair for cancer to make wigs for cancer victims. Another person who had terrible problems with her dad because he was a commander in the army and she kept cutting her hair really short and dyeing it blue. And it brought up other memories. I recommend that for anybody here who wants to, just start with a prompt. Start writing the history of your hair and see where it takes you, because you don't have to stick with your hair. If it takes you into your relationship with your parents who wanted you to cut it or grow it or groom it or whatever, you can go off in that direction. Or it can take you, so many different places. It's funny, but I got some of the best personal essays out of that.
So if we use that prompt about writing about our hair, that is the definition of writing off the top of our head. Right?
That is really well. Now, if I was going to do that prompt, I'd have a title for it. So
there you go.
No,
that's a definition of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, very good.
So, okay, one thing I know in the music world is there are musicians and artists that inspire me, and then there's musicians and artists that make me want to quit because they're so amazing, they're so talented, they're so gifted. And I look at my writing style and my music and go, I'll never be like them, so why try? That's one side of it. And then there's the other ones that just make me want to go out and get my instrument and start playing because there's something about them that inspires me. For an authors, I would believe there'd be the same type of thing where you have an author that's just way beyond where you're at currently and you're thinking, why should I even try? And there's authors that inspire you to write. Who is it for you that inspires you as an author? I think we talked about an author yesterday when we chatted that was inspiring you, a book that you really enjoyed. But who is it that's inspiring you right now?
Who's inspiring me right now? It's almost always whatever I'm reading at the moment inspires me. And I guess one of the places I've gotten to with age is sometimes I read books and I think, I never could have written that. I never could have done the research, or I never could have, whatever. And it's something. But now I don't care that much. It's like, that's not what I do. I mean, I really can appreciate this and enjoy this. But then there's other writers, like one short story writer I can think of is Alice Munro, a Canadian writer. What she does with time and sentences and how you think you know where you're going in the story, and then the floor drops out from under you and you're in a different time, or there's something you weren't expecting. She's taught me a lot. So that's inspiring. And but then there's writers. I saw a film, maybe you've seen it. You should look it up if you haven't seen it. It's a documentary called Turn Every Page. And it's about Robert Carroll, who wrote all the Lyndon Johnson books, which are all, 5 inches thick with tons of research. And I really like those books. Because I like digging into people, and it really digs into his past. But there is no way I could write that. So it's not usually that it's so much better. It's more that I just couldn't do that, and that's okay. That's not what I'm going to do. And when I think back, I mentioned to you I was a teenage mom, and it took me a while to get through my education and everything, and become a professor. It took a while from being a teenage mom. But what amazes me is that I didn't question that I could become a writer. And it was probably foolish, but I just didn't question it. And so even though I can remember at times thinking, I really don't know how to say this in words. And I think that I don't know how to write this. And it wasn't something amazing like the Robert Carroll books where you had to do 10 years of research. It was just something, an emotion or expression. I thought, I don't know how to say this in words. And sometimes my students would say that in a short story or an essay, they'd say, you can't put it into words. And I just say, that's your job as a writer, to try and find out how to put it in words. You're kind of not allowed to write that, or you're only allowed to write it once or twice in your whole life. The rest of the time you got to figure out how to get it into words. So
I like that. I like it. The one book you mentioned when we chatted yesterday was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow.
Yes.
Right. Now that book was a little unexpected when you recommended it as a book for me to look at. I've actually reached out to the author to have her on the podcast as well. Based on your recommendation, I told her, hey, I would love to have you on. So if she does come on, is there a question that I could ask her on your behalf as someone that has read this book? Why is this book so important to you?
Well, one of the reasons I think the book's about creativity. And because, as I told you yesterday, I thought this is not a book. Actually, my niece sent it to me, and I thought, this is not a book I'm going to like. It's about designing video games.
Right.
And I haven't played a video game since Pac-Man came out, I don't think. But I just so loved the book. And because it was about creativity, how you create a story, a lot of it was about, because the video games, which the people in this book were writing, are very high-end video games with complex characters and complex stories. The writing classes that the game designers took when they were in college were very much like creative writing courses I took. There was a lot more tech involved, which would be a problem for me. But I love the writing about creativity. It's hard to talk about creativity, I think, or write about creativity and have it seem real. Also, the book spans about 30 years. So that's interesting. You get to grow up with the characters, but it really is an amazing book and inspiring. Again, it's not one that I could write. Well, I certainly couldn't write about video games, but I felt I learned things from it that I could do and could, like to try. So,
yeah, I like the idea of something that's outside of the scope of your normal focus. For me, a video game book, I haven't played video games in a long time, but it's outside of the book that I would naturally gravitate to.
Right.
And I think that's where you find some of those moments that inspire you the most, is when you're outside of your normal interests and things that you find interesting or bring you value. When you reach outside of those areas and expand yourself a little bit more, you get to get inspiration from new sources that you would never have known of. So I love your example. Really spoke to me that, I think we all need to be a little bit more expansive with our reach.
I'm excited that you reached out to her. That is very, very cool. Yeah, she sounds like an interesting person too. I've only read a little of her bio notes, but she sounds like an interesting person as well. Yeah.
You're helping to shape my show just by their recommendation. So thank you. That was awesome.
Oh, cool. That is great.
So before we wrap up, for the people listening at home or wherever they are as they listen to the podcast, who would your writings be a great gift idea for as well? Who would benefit from picking up a copy of your writings? Who can I send this to and think this is really going to sit with my friend or my relative, or I would love to give this as a gift idea as well. Who can I send this to?
I kind of hate to say this, but I think mostly women readers. I mean, although there's some stories that, like the one about the boy who falls in the gorilla pit at the zoo, but there's 3 stories in it that are attached to men's point of views. But I think people who are interested more in character than in plot, more in image and language than in seeing how fast you can turn the pages. I mean, I like to turn pages quickly, but I also like to look at language and images, and I really care about people. So every character in the book is kind of a real person to me. So that would be a good person to give Cravings to. Also, I think you have my website up somewhere. They can go on there and look at stuff, and it has some other samples of my writing. I had a little piece in the New Yorker once. I had I have a and I have one. I talked about my mom's Alzheimer's. I have a piece on the website about that. That's about a time I got a call from her facility because she had eaten someone else's bouquet of flowers, or started to.
No.
So I mean, it's sort of horrifying and funny at the same time. But yeah, they could go on my website, or Cravings, I think, would be good for people who care about characters, people who care about people and want to study why people do something. My favorite story in the book is probably the last one, which is about, I shouldn't say that. You're not supposed to have favorite children, but it's about polyamorous marriage, and which I have no real personal contact with people in that, but I was so fascinated by the idea of it, and by the way other people looked at it, people who weren't involved in something like this. So
interesting.
So I hope you buy
Excellent.
it for presents for a lot of people.
Yes, by many, and leave a great review as well. That's also a great thing you can do.
Oh, thank you for saying that.
Make sure people know. It's exciting. So when you said earlier that retirement felt like the end for you, I think this is the start of something great for you. You've got some good things ahead for you in your writing time and your career. And I just think you're an amazing person to talk to. So I'm really happy to have you on the podcast. I'm looking forward to hearing you on many, many shows doing this and sharing your stories, because I think we all love to connect with our authors. And when we see a book on the shelf or on a website, and we now know and have heard your voice and heard some of the stories behind who you are as an author, it makes us want to support you even more. So do more of this, because you're a great guest on a podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, you're a great interviewer, or conversationalist, I should say, because I just really enjoyed talking to you. And I've done one other podcast in my life, and at the time it was for my last book, and I didn't even know what a podcast was when I did it. And but I was nervous, And I was really nervous this time because it had been 8 years and I know what a podcast is now. But you just made it so easy. It was so much fun to talk to you.
There is no way that anyone listening to this would tell that you're nervous. You were a superstar. So yes, do more of this because you have a gift. And I think we all need to hear more from you. So I'm looking forward to hearing you on more episodes.
Thank you so much, David. This was great.
Excellent. Everyone, please go check out all the show notes, the website, everywhere to connect with our guests. Everything is there. And Garnett, thank you again for giving us time in your calendar to chat about all the great things you have coming.
It was nothing but fun. Thank you.
Really appreciate you being here and being part of our podcast community. LivingTheNextChapter.com is our website. I have an offer for you as an author, if you're listening, and you're wanting to build your website for your book. I've had so many authors come on and they're struggling in this area. I'd love to help you. All of the websites that I built for my different podcasts, I have experience and I'd love to help you and get you up and running. I can help you with your domain purchase. I can help you with setting up your podcast, making it really simple. And if you love Canva, we can even set it up on Canva for you and you can do all your own maintenance. You don't need to hire anybody. We'll help you get set up. So if that interests you as an author and you want a website for your book, let me know. We can do this. I can help you. LivingTheNextChapter.com is the website for the podcast. You can find me there. I'd love to help you. Reach out. Let me know if I can be of assistance in any way. And thank you again for listening to Living the Next Chapter. Today is where your book begins. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening.